Ready? Are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Hey everybody, welcome back to Chalkboard History. So over the last few months, I've been sitting down with various members of the staff. So a few months ago, I asked Randy Purcell, who's worked for the trust since when? 2011?
Oh, it's probably 15 years.
15 years.
Yeah.
So I asked Randy if he would sit down and have a conversation. And then he tried to get out of it the other day and said he was shy in front of a camera. And I said, oh, that's nonsense. You'll talk to anybody about anything. I think Randy just didn't want to drive all the way down here to Ripavilla. So I used the CEO blowtorch and dragged him in. So I thought, because Randy was a reenactor in his younger days, but he's also worked at the Carter House pretty much, exclusively.
Yes.
For all these years, so he's seen a lot. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, maybe about the visitor center. But tell us about reenacting days. What got you into it? What's the craziest thing you ever saw? What's the biggest battle you were ever in?
The biggest battle I was ever in was probably the 135th Chickamauga. They called it Chocamaga because it was so dusty. And there was probably 10,000 reenactors over 3 days. And when you saw the armies out there, they looked like real armies.
So
fighting.
that would have been, what, like 1998?
Probably sometime in that time frame, yeah.
Because Chickamauga is 63, so add 5 on to, 1998. Wow.
Yeah, so it was a big event. Night fights, day fights, a lot of ticks, hot, dusty.
So when you say night fights, did you guys recreate Claiborne's attack? Was that what it was?
I don't know exactly what it was. I just showed up with a gun and did what I was told.
What unit were you in?
I was with a group called the 36th Virginia Company A, which was not there. But that was the reenacting group. I was out of Huntington, West Virginia, between Huntington and Charleston. So I was over in that side of the world. But
so you lived there then? You weren't in Tennessee?
I was not in Tennessee at the time. Although I'm a Tennessean, grew up in Franklin. The event was there. And so back in the day, I've traveled from Battle Creek, Michigan, where there was never a fight, but they did reenacting up there. So I was in Battle Creek, Michigan, the Carolinas, Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee.
But did you both sides or always Confederate?
Almost always Confederate, but as probably today, they always need people to galvanize. So if you showed up and there was nobody wearing blue, you would switch.
So when you got into this, how old were you when you first put the gear on?
Oh, probably in my 30s. And now I'm in my 60s. So it was just something I was always interested in. Growing up in Franklin, history was always important, and Civil War history especially. So I had the time and desire to get into reenacting. So I joined a group in West Virginia, but we traveled all over the place, did big events, did some really small events, but they were always fun.
Were you part of did you do it when you got back here?
When I got back here, I did not do a lot of reenacting. I did not join a group. Of course, you could always show up in an event. And
what's the last one you were at?
The last one that I was at was probably the big one at Carnton, but I wasn't wearing that uniform because I worked for the sheriff's office. I worked security for the event.
So that in 2014.
At Carnton.
Yeah, that
was a big event.
Yeah, that's Saturday.
Yes.
Oh, it was cold, but it was that was a great day. And of course, then the next day, the rain came down in buckets, and the second day got canceled. So you weren't at the 2004 event that was here. Well, it was actually kind of back there.
I was at that. I lived in West Virginia at the time.
But you came here.
I came here for that.
I was there?
I did not know you were there.
I flew in from Arizona, and I saw the event. That is an event, like I never...
It was a big event.
I never reenacted, but that was an event that I remember because I was standing kind of behind the federal line. And when I saw the Confederates, they kind of dipped down because, the ground's not perfectly flat. And you could kind of hear them. I don't think you could feel it. There weren't enough guys for that. But I do remember seeing that Hardy Corps flag start to come up out of the low ground. And, it was a huge line. And, you got kind of goosebumps. So I was like, wow.
Yeah, that was a big event. But yeah, I came down for that one and actually reenacted that. I don't even remember which group I was with because, like I said, if you had a rifle and a uniform, you could join up with and knew kind of what you were doing. So, yeah, I was here for that event. And,
so, what made you want to work at Carter House?
Well, because I grew up in Franklin, I was always interested in, and I went to Battleground Academy when it was actually on the battleground. And so I grew up with the Battle of Franklin Civil War history, and I thought, hey, this might be kind of a fun thing to do. And I came to you, and took a minute, but I finally got hired. And at the time I lived right behind Carnton, but you put me to work at Carter House, and you trained me, I think, for 2 or 3 days at Carnton, but I never gave a tour at Carnton.
Yeah.
Because you kept me over at Carter and kind of.
Well, and those were crazy, not crazy. Those were interesting days at Carter House because that would have been, a couple of years after the trust was created and we had taken over. So you didn't see some of that early nonsense we dealt with. I think there was probably climate control in the house by the time you started.
Yes.
But those were important days because we were building. In business, you'd call it building a brand, but we were putting our stamp on that site and what we wanted, to do and what we wanted to emphasize. So if you think about, through all the years and, we've had many discussions because as with Chaparral was sitting here the other day and, the list is long because we talk about everything. We talk about history, we talk about politics, we talk about old-timey politics, we talk about everything. Because I think having an open dialogue is always good. So you saw, you were there when, we went through that really crazy reckoning with the Confederacy and the flag, and then you were there when I was working on the Fuller story. You were there during COVID and all that stuff. What's it been like to because you've always been a part-time employee.
Yes.
Working usually, if not 1 day, 2 days a week.
Well, there was a time I worked 3 days a week.
3 days a week, and now back to 1 day a week. But
correct.
What's the evolution of the site been like for you?
Well, I missed the transition, but I came in right after the transition, so I wasn't there for any of the drama of transition because I think there was a little bit of friction between the two sites because at that time we only operated the two sites. But I came in right after that transition, so I didn't have to deal with that. I think Carter House somehow always felt like they were a stepchild to Carnton because Carnton's a big, beautiful home and people go there more than they come to Carter House. But I think the trust, whether it's Carter House or now at Rippavilla, has incorporated a more of a full experience for a visitor because they can see 3 different homes instead of just going to Carnton, which I think that was more the norm back in the day. And then it got to be people would go to both. And now, as I'm sure you're more aware than I am, now it's like people go to all 3. Mm-hmm. So that's been a good thing for history and people's knowledge and experience, having 3 sites to go to that are operated professionally. And so, that's been a good thing. I know the rumor was that during COVID, a lot of sites didn't have visitors, but other than that 6-week period when we shut down during COVID, I think it was about 6 weeks.
Yep.
Yeah. But people kept coming. I don't know whether that's because we were still operating and other places weren't, or people still had the interest even during COVID. So, I thought we maintained a decent visitor crowd during COVID, and it's continued now. And like I said, I don't know the numbers. I know you do because you stay up on that stuff.
Well, you made a point about how people, Carnton was the most visited, and it still is, but not by much. We have more than doubled attendance at Carter House, which is really amazing when you think about Carter House was an established site for 20 years before Carnton even opened. And then Carnton took off, and I have some ideas about why Carnton eventually, and I think it's the bigger home. It's a kind of a sexy
the
story.
Cemetery.
Right. Yeah, Widow of the South helped, but I think there were some things that were being done at Carter House back in the day that I think kind of held it back. And I worked hard to kind of open up the gates to get everybody in. There were two sides fighting in the battle.
Right.
The Carter family has a story to tell too, because they had lives long before and after, and not everything was just about Todd Carter. And so you've been through all that. But what's your favorite story about the Carter House or the Battle of Franklin, or both?
Well, some people stress different points of the Carter House and the Battle of Franklin. I think the bullet damage is awesome. People are always impressed with the bullet damage.
Isn't that farm office incredible?
It is amazing. It's the cherry at the end of the tour, because you open the door and people just gasp when they see the bullet damage.
And we've been around long enough to remember when that wasn't part of the tour.
No, it was not.
We restored it and opened it in 2017. So
it's added the experience of the people, because you can see it from the outside, but to open that door and see that from the inside and take a picture, and it doesn't matter what the weather conditions, it's amazing to see that damage. And it's the only place people can see that kind of damage from the Civil War to that extent.
I've come to really think that there was always something very sobering about seeing the bloodstains at Carnton, or seeing the Confederate cemetery, just the way that it's laid out. And I mean sobering, like it hits you. I always thought the bullet holes and the strike marks on the smokehouse were really cool.
Yes.
But to see the bullet holes in the farm office from the inside, that's sobering.
Very much.
That now equates with the power of what you see at Carnton. And you've probably heard me say this. If you're on the outside of the buildings, I still think the ricochet marks on the smokehouse are as cool as anything, where that lead, those little conical shaped marks, it's like the lead just burned into the brick that day. And
right.
Through 160 years of weather, rain, sun, they're still there.
Yeah, I point that out to people because I ask, do you realize what you're looking at? And normally they don't. And I'll say, the bullets were made of lead, and that is a lead impression. And people, then it's like, oh, well, then it's worse than I thought it was, because I didn't realize those were bullet strikes also.
Jacob Cox wrote about those. He must have come back here one time when he was working on his book. And I remember before I ever visited Franklin, I had read his book, and I went looking for those, I think, first. And it's like a splatter mark where you see where the bullet hits, and then it because it clearly bounces, ricochets, and there's that, like that burn mark on the, it's incredible. But so is that the favorite story? What about the favorite family story?
Oh, well, it's got to be the Todd Carter thing. I mean, the son being shot on his own, or fighting on his own property, being shot multiple times on his own property, and actually dying in the house. That story is unique to my knowledge of Civil War history in total, and the Todd Carter story is unique, and people find that very interesting. I think that's one thing a lot of people are surprised, because if you go to a big Civil War site, a Gettysburg or a Shiloh, big open fields, lots of great things to see, but there's no family story involved. Yeah. There's no bullet damage to see. But the family story, I think a lot of people go away not expecting what they've gotten, because they don't know it's coming. Even folks that have been to the big Civil War sites, it's unique and it's different, and folks appreciate the family angle that they don't get at some of the big Civil War sites.
Yes, there's no doubt about that. And that's true of both Carnton and Carter House. I've told guests for 20 years, you can go to Shiloh, you can go to Chickamauga, you can go to Vicksburg, you can go to Gettysburg, Antietam. You cannot get what you get in Franklin at those places, because you don't just get the family on that day. You get a sense of who they were for years before the war, and of course all of them, and now including the chairs at Ripa Villa, they lived in these homes for decades. After Moscow Carter lived, at Carter House for 30 years. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day that when he sold Carter House, I think McKinley had just been elected president. That's a long, long time. And he lived until 1913. So, in closing, tell us your thoughts about a new visitor center. What does a new visitor center mean? And, what does it mean to you? And what do you think it's going to mean to the guests?
Well, what we have now is adequate, but it's old. And people can appreciate the museum, but I think we'll have more space and better
more than one bathroom
capability. Oh, the bathroom situation will definitely be improvement, but I think the guests will get a better experience. It's not that they're not getting a good experience now, but they'll get a better experience when they have the capability to see more things, because our visitor center currently is small. It'll be bigger. There'll be more opportunity to show things that I know we have, and I think people will appreciate that opportunity, and it'll be a good thing.
So I get to put you on the spot, because I did this to Chaperone. I thought, well, if I did it to him, I'm going to do it to you, because
Great.
One of the things, as I said earlier, we talk about everything. And I think a lot of times, not so much guests, but I think people on the outside who don't actually visit historic sites, they have opinions about, what professors are like, or what writers are like, or what Ken Burns really thinks about stuff. If you're talking about somebody whose name is well known, and then they come to a historic site and they're like, well, if they work at this site, they must be of this political persuasion. And if they work at this site, they got to be of this political persuasion. And we've heard it all, right?
Sure.
I think a lot of people who show up at the sites we work at probably assume that we're mostly conservative, and I think a lot of us are. But as you know, we have 40 people working for us, and they come from all different angles. So, as I said to Chaperone, I think we're both, like he and I think we're both conservative-ish. I think you're a little more than me, but, and that makes for fun. And then I could rattle off some of the liberals that work for us, but we don't want to taint
We know who they are.
We don't want to taint their names right now. But what does it mean to you as someone who reenacted, who's raised in Tennessee? The new exhibit at the museum is Carter House Visitor Center is going to be all men are created equal. We're going to take people from the founding to the first inaugural address, and then into the war. Because the reason I'm going to ask this question, and I want you to answer it, is I think people believe, based on your political persuasion, you must think this way about history. What does it mean in 2025 to you? What does the Confederacy mean to you, its legacy? And is it different than it was, let's say, when you started reenacting?
Personally.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one thing, on my tour, I have the opportunity to tell people that my great-great-grandfather fought at the Battle of Franklin. And I think...
And what unit?
The 9th Indiana. And so
I forgot that.
I think people are surprised, because all of a sudden this old Southern guy with a twang in his voice is talking about a soldier that fought at the Battle of Franklin for the North, for the Union. And so people are surprised when they hear that, and it's kind of fun because they're not expecting it. But I think the thing we do at the Carter House, and I will go out on a limb and say at the other sites also, is we do give a balanced view of the war and of slavery, and we don't stress positive, negative. We just tell it like it was, and I think people appreciate that. And once again, sometimes people are somewhat shocked because they're expecting you to be on a southern slant because you're in Franklin, Tennessee at a Civil War site. So I think that is a good thing that we do give a fair and a balanced approach to the war, to the causes of the war, to the situation, and I think people appreciate that. I had someone only yesterday comment about the museum. They were impressed with the presentation in our museum currently at the Carter House,
which talks about the lost cause.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that was only yesterday. Somebody was commenting about how they appreciated the approach we were taking on the war itself and the cause and effect of the war. So I think that's something that makes all three sites special, is that we're telling a story, but we're not putting, while I may have a different political opinion currently than you do or one of the other members of the staff, that's not what I'm at the Carter House to do.
Yeah.
I'm there to tell a story of 1864 and prior and the war. And we all do that well. And while there's a guy I worked with yesterday who I know is more leaning liberal than I am, but when he goes on the tour, he's not talking about his personal political views. And I think that is special, because I'm sure not all sites are that way, but we are. So I think that's something we can crow about and be proud of, that we tell a story, and it is what it is, and we don't put our personal views into it.
Well, that's a great answer, and I was hoping that's the one that you would give, because I think a lot of people, when you just tell them how it is, they sometimes think that that's judgment. And I told someone just last week who asked me a question about interpretation, and I said, it's not a judgment to tell you what they said in 1861. And it's not your fault, my fault, anybody's fault that, events played out as they did. And none of us did it, so we don't have any guilt or complicity in it, but we also don't have to make excuses. And I think the Carters are actually a great example, as Rosalie Carter, who knew her grandfather, Moscow, said. That family was divided by two flags. And to go back to Todd, you're a parent, I'm a parent. I cannot, in their days you want to, throttle your own kids, right?
True.
I cannot imagine what that poor man, Fountain Branch Carter, was going through when he had to go out on that godforsaken battlefield and find his boy, who by the time they got to him, although he was alive, I think whatever Todd was gone.
Yes.
The heart was just still beating. And that does resonate with guests, because how many fathers have had to bury their sons? True. And that's Sheila and I this is our second episode today. We were talking about Memorial Day, and what it means and why it was created. And so, yeah, you're right. It's everybody has an opinion. Our job is to deal in the facts.
Correct.
And hopefully some people, you're right, some people I think show up and they are pleasantly surprised that it isn't a sort of southern tilt. But we're old enough. I remember visiting years ago when it was, and I think that was one of the things that actually held the sites back. And now, there are more people visiting than ever, and that's a good thing. So,
it is.
Any last thoughts about the Carter House or the Battle of Franklin or old days as a reenactor?
I did want to say one thing, that my biggest shock since day one at Carter House has been the guests who come, because when I started, my initial thought was, this is just going to be a bunch of good old boys from Alabama and Georgia showing up.
Yeah.
And it is not an exception to see Canadians, Europeans, folks from the South Pacific, New Zealand or Australia. That's not rare. And that's impressive to me that we have people from all over the world coming to see us who are interested in American Civil War history. That has been my biggest shock since day one, and it still shocks me today, but it happens constantly that we do have visitors from all over the world, and I think that is a good thing.
Yeah, and I've noticed especially over the last 4 to 6 weeks, we are 5 years from when COVID started, but we're really only about 3 years from when it ended. Mm-hmm. When the dying finally stopped and all this, in my opinion, some overburdensome restrictions finally ended, and then we had inflation and we had up and down. It finally, May felt like the old days. May felt it was busy. People were from all over. And nobody was fussing. They were just out visiting like they did, back in 2017, 18, and 19 before the world seemed to kind of come unraveled. So that's a good thing. Visitor Center opens in the spring. I'm sure that you'll still be with us then.
Of course.
And so come see Randy. He's at Carter House now on
Tuesdays
only matinee.
Except when you call me and say I need you Sunday or another day.
Like this Sunday, is that right?
Sunday I will be there.
Well,
yes.
Sunday's a mess because half the staff apparently is on vacation or ill. So, anyways, Randy's got matinee showings every Tuesday at the Carter House. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.